Joining us right now is Andrew McCarthy, best-selling author, a senior fellow at National Review, a man who has very strong feelings about how the president is using the Constitution. Andrew, thanks for joining us here on Mornings on the Mall.
It's my pleasure, gents. How are you?
All right, so the President of the United States last night gives a speech in which he outlines a plan to provide amnesty to some 5 million people who are here illegally. He does so without going to Congress, without going through any kind of legislative effort. He does it by executive fiat. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that you have to divide what he did. It's not really one undifferentiated lump, and there's some of it that he clearly has authority to do, and there's others of it where it's highly debatable to unlikely that he has the power to do it. With respect to a decision by the president not to enforce the immigration laws against categories of people, there's no question that the president has enforcement discretion. He can decide not to bring cases, and neither Congress nor the courts have the power to force him to enforce the immigration law.
And you say that as a former U.S. attorney.
Yeah, it's a basic principle of constitutional law and of executive enforcement of the criminal laws, and it's really something that prosecutors do all the time. You know, the best example is probably narcotics enforcement, where there's very limited federal resources for prosecution, so the feds target what they have at big heroin and cocaine distribution networks, and they essentially ignore things like marijuana possession and small distributions and that.
I don't want to interrupt your larger point, but let me just ask a question about that. I mean, that's not ignoring the law. You're not saying that the laws don't exist.
Right.
And in the issue of ignoring the immigration laws, the president has sent around the order saying we're just not going to pay attention to this law whatsoever.
You make a great point. The prosecutorial discretion, if you do it within the context of the president's oath and duty under the Constitution to execute the laws faithfully, is just a resource allocation doctrine. It's a common sense thing that says we're going to target our resources at the most serious offenses, but you're not supposed to exercise it in a way that has the effect of rewriting Congress's laws. And I think, the criticism, which I think is valid against the president here, is he is effectively rewriting the immigration laws.
Yeah. This is why I love Andrew McCarthy. He uses quaint ideas like oath of office and the Constitution and things like that.
Faithfully execute.
The president also said this last night. I would love to hear you, Andrew McCarthy, respond to this directly. This is the president last night.
For those members of Congress who question my authority to make our immigration system work better, or question the wisdom of me acting where Congress has failed, I have one answer. Pass a bill.
Is that good enough?
Well, no, of course not. The fact is that the president doesn't get to fill a legislative void of his own imagination by saying, I've waited for Congress to act, they won't act, and therefore I must. When Congress doesn't act, it doesn't mean it's sort of kicking up its heels on its desk and shirking its responsibilities. It means it's saying no.
Yes.
The president gets.
I want a thought. Yeah.
The president gets to propose law, and Congress can either say yes or no. And I think the interesting thing about this is for the president to bang on his desk and say, I've waited and Congress won't act. Well, look, the way in our system that you address that is you campaign on the issue against the congressmen who won't act and try to get them booted out of office. It happens that the public seems to support the position, particularly that the House has taken against open borders immigration, which is, favored by, on the right and the left, people like the president and the Chamber of Commerce, et cetera. Yeah. If what the president was calling for had resonance with the public, then you would vote those guys out of office and you'd have a bunch of representatives come in who voted for open borders, but that hasn't happened.
That's an interesting point. I mean, there's an old Chinese proverb that sometimes doing nothing is doing something. And that's what they've done. They've said no, in effect, by doing nothing.
Yeah, right. If the president said, I'd like a new law that says that instead of life imprisonment, blowing up buildings should only be a 3-year offense. If Congress doesn't act on that suggestion, it doesn't mean that they're not doing their job. It means they think it's a stupid idea and they don't want to enact it.
Right, or for that matter, if George Bush had, when he wanted Social Security reform and that got rejected by Congress, then he didn't go and just execute it. Let me ask you this. In your latest article in National Review, it sounded as though you were making the case that impeachment is and should be an option for Congress here. Explain that.
Well, see, here, I think it's important to talk about impeachment, and of course I've written a book about
faithless execution, building the political case for Obama's impeachment. Yes.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that there's a political appetite in the country to impeach the president, because there's not. And as I say in the book, I don't think you should go down the impeachment road unless you have public support for actually removing the president, because otherwise you create a lot of public strife for no good reason. But there are certain abuses of presidential power that can only be addressed in our system by impeachment. For example, if the president abuses the pardon power, if he got up today and says, "Gee, it's Friday, I think I'm going to pardon every prisoner in federal prison," he's allowed to do that, but it would be a gross abuse of power, and the only thing in the system to combat that is impeachment. I think it's important to make that point, because Congress keeps saying things like, well, we can't impeach him, and then from there they go, and we can't really use the power of the purse because that might shut down the government, and people say nasty things about us, and so they go down and they keep checking off the things they can do and essentially rejecting the tools that the Constitution gives them. I think if you don't talk about impeachment and stress to people that some of this stuff is very serious presidential misbehavior, you'll never change the political climate that has Congress thinking it can't even use the power of the purse.
Well, it's almost as if many people have said, just thrown up their hands and say, please, Supreme Court, you're our only hope.
Yeah, and they're really not. Particularly in an area like immigration, it's frivolous for these people in Congress to be saying, well, we'll take the president to court. The courts are not going to hear these cases. President Obama has shown over the years that he doesn't pay any more attention to bad court decisions than he does statutes that are inconvenient.
Yeah, good point. Let me ask you this then, Andrew McCarthy. We've only got about 30 seconds left, but John Boehner, Mitch McConnell, all the wise men on Capitol Hill, they pick up the phone, they call you into the office, say, hey, Andrew McCarthy, you know the law, you know the Constitution. What should we do now? What do you tell them?
Well, I think that they need to use the power of the purse to defund the aspects of the program that people most object to, which is basically this rewriting of the law to give at least temporary status to these people. Now, whether they'll actually do that or not, I'm not encouraged that they will. But
that's a political question. That's a political question. But in terms of legally and what the best first course of action, you think that's the way to go?
Power of the purse.
All right.
Andrew McCarthy, it is a pleasure to have you on this morning.
Thanks so much, gents. I appreciate it.